Go live. Okay. And then hit record. All right. We are live. Welcome, folks. Welcome to the Liberty on the Land podcast. This is Curtis Stone, episode 20 with Christian Westbrook. And you know what? I have to put my headphones on, Christian. We are live.
Okay.
Give me 1 second here.
Welcome, folks. Welcome to the Liberty on the Land podcast. This is Curtis Stone, episode 20 with Christian Westbrook. And
okay, there we go. Sorry about the technical difficulty there. Christian, thanks for coming today, man.
Curtis, glad to be back. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you. It's almost been a year since we last talked, actually.
Well,
I think maybe it was early spring or something last year. We did our episode together, and there is so much going on right now. It's just unbelievable. Before we started rolling, we were just talking about how all of this stuff is just accelerated, and what's going on right now is just constant, like boom, 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 boom. So today I thought it would be kind of cool to just go over some of this stuff. For any people listening, I would highly encourage you to follow Christian on his Telegram channel, the Ice Age Farmer. If they search that, will they find it on Telegram, or should we share the link?
I don't know, but it's just t.me/iceagefarmer.
Right, there it is. Boom. Yeah, I would highly encourage everybody to follow Christian there, because he's always sharing really good links, and you're consistently on there. You're consistently sharing, at least. It's kind of nice with Telegram, because it's very seamless on how to share things.
Yeah, they make it pretty easy to scoot stuff around that platform.
They do. So, yeah, why don't we maybe to start, because there might be some folks here that don't know who you are, maybe introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you do.
Sure, yeah. So thanks again for having me. And it has been roughly a year since that first broadcast, and everything we talked about in there has really come to fruition, and then some. It's been staggering. Like you said, the rate of things that are rolling out is just accelerating rapidly. I kicked off a channel a few years back looking at the cycles of the sun and the way that affects climate on this planet. And then in turn, the way that affects food production. And that's where Ice Age Farmer, the name, comes from. And then really in covering that and watching the crop losses, but particularly in noticing that the USDA wasn't acknowledging those, and sort of delving into that and getting some interviews and opinions from people in, ag experts and analysts, started to uncover this deeper agenda to lie about the state of our food supply in order to take total control over it. And we've seen a lot of the agendas roll out from the UN and rolling down to the World Economic Forum and all these Rockefeller Foundation, all these other think tanks and globalists, unelected EU sort of bureaucrats that have said, yeah, we're going to force you all to be eating bugs. And now in the very near future here, we're going to have bug proteins and lab grown meat. And you've seen this come out, especially during the pandemic, of course, in the name of COVID. They just started pushing real hard on all these things.
Yep.
And to make the case that this has to happen, there's two things that are going on. First, they are demonstrating that farming, and especially animal agriculture, ranching, is dirty and dangerous, and it contributes to pandemics, and it causes diseases, and we should all be afraid. And you've seen the lettuce recalls and things like this, and a lot of bird flu outbreak. Right, if you watch the headlines, you basically can't go a few days without seeing 100,000 birds cold here or there. This week, it's Vietnam just took off 100,000 chickens because of a bird flu outbreak. And so this is part of them making that case that, yeah, we have to go to lab-grown meat. You don't have an option, because farming and ranching, even though we've done it since the beginning of time, it's dirty and dangerous, and you're not allowed to grow your own food or live on the land anymore. And then, frighteningly, the second thing that's going on right now is, as I said, they've been for some time setting this up. George W. Bush sold off the strategic grain reserves right before Obama came in office. So this has been a play that's been in motion for a long time, this agenda. And then gradually, like I said, the USDA has been lying about the extent of crop losses, really hiding the fact that we've been whittling down. And only over these last few crop reports have they started saying, oh yeah, actually there's no, these 40 million metric bushels or whatever it is of, metric tons of soybeans aren't there. They've been gradually writing this down over and over, coming to the realization that actually we are running out of food. And so, yeah, there's a deliberately engineered food shortage, which again will they'll point at that and then make the case because of this food shortage. Now you see, right now you're experiencing the pain. You see that we have to go to the lab grown meat, to the indoor vertical farms and all this nonsense. And so the scope of my channel and what I've been looking into has grown as I sort of went through those layers of what's going on now. But that's sort of like a quick rundown of where we've been, and it's kicking into absolute hyperdrive right now. So I'm looking forward to seeing where you take us today.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the good old Hegelian dialectic, right? Problem, reaction, solution. It's the same old scam that's been going on forever, and it's quite liberating, actually, in my experience. Once you see the patterns and you see the things that they do, you can look at all the headlines and go, oh yeah, it all makes sense. It's the same old scam. It's really taken me 10 years to kind of get my head around those fundamentals. And I have to actually say, I know you're a student of permaculture as well, but it's been my journey through that and connecting to the land and being more connected to nature, where I've learned patterns and where to see patterns and how to see them. And then once you see them, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
And these people that are pulling a lot of the strings, and I kind of want to be specific with that, and I'm kind of curious where you are, but really, what I'm talking about when I look at what's going on right now, it really comes down to a few different organizations and individuals. One is the Rockefeller Foundation, has been instrumental in this rollout of this pandemic, and they're also instrumental in the big narrative of climate change, because they had the Club of Rome. They started the Club of Rome back in, what was that, the 1960s. And then we've got the WHO, we've got now the Gates Foundation, and perhaps a few other cronies. But these people have been really bent on consolidating power for themselves, but they really do believe that we're just a bunch of plebs, and we need them to guide us into their vision of the world, which is really the New World Order.
Without a doubt. And it takes a bunch of different forms in different parts of the world. So you mentioned sort of the Western aspect of this. And then, like we said, the EU is rolling out. They've got an agenda that is mirroring the Rockefeller Foundation's Reset the Table agenda.
Yes.
Theirs is called the EU Farm to Fork. It's just the technocratic takeover of the food supply. In China, they just unveiled over this past summer something called the Clean Your Plate initiative, which says, you can't order a meal for everyone at the table. You have to order less food than you're going to need. And you can't post pictures of social media. So they're pushing everywhere around the world. Again, it takes different forms, but they're definitely pushing hard on this takeover of food. And you're right also that, like, I saw there was a piece just yesterday, and this is really staggering, just one little fractal aspect of this. There's a piece yesterday where in Australia, they have just proposed to reclassify manure as industrial waste product. So this is something that, it doesn't make any sense. You see the farmers there are saying, we've used this since the beginning of time. This is how we fertilize our crops, right? This is a key to organic farming. And they're trying to take this away from us and call it a hazardous, some hazmat nonsense, make it in the same category where you have to pay extra money to dispose of your manure in isolated containers and all these things. And I saw this one farmer, sort of representative saying, this doesn't make any sense. But like you were saying, it does when you put it into the context of this larger takeover of the food system. And so, yes, once you have discerned the agenda and you connect these dots, then you see these things which in themselves, if you just look at them as disparate little things, they don't add up. They don't make sense. But together they absolutely paint a very clear picture of what's going on.
Very much. So for myself, with the last year and all the things that have rolled out, there's really two documents that have been that were out in the open. One you just mentioned is the Reset the Table. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that if you don't mind. I also have a copy of the Rockefeller Foundation document that's titled Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development. That's the document. I'm just going to share my screen for a second. And if you want to share some stuff too, I'll pass over the privileges to you. But this document here, I shared this on my Telegram channel with people. This is the document that really lays out kind of where we are now. This, I believe this was published in May of 2010. And this document pretty much tells us exactly what was going to happen. And there's a chapter here called Lockstep on page 18, which really lays out this whole idea of bringing together a new world order, a surveillance state, and then sort of, some nice virtue signaling about the environment and climate change and all that, and then this whole thing about hack attack, which I is kind of where we are with this whole the cyber pandemic that they seem to be wanting to push as well, and some other good stuff in here. But basically, they lay out in this chapter here how they will push society to the breaking point where people start to get really angry, and then that will allow them to bring in a new sort of lockdown scenario where they can bring in sort of a police state. And it's amazing because this stuff is all happening now.
Yeah, it's a perfect script. The lockstep you've got pulled up, that scenario is absolutely the script through which we have been walking throughout the CV. I don't even want to mention it on YouTube.
Yeah, right.
But it spells out to a T exactly what's going on. And so too, if you look at, there was a George Soros funded John Podesta run through the Center for American Progress event. It's one of these tabletop exercises, the globalist think tanks putting their exercises together, their simulations, called the Food Chain Reaction Game, which was 6 years ago. It was in 2015, but it foresaw a time, in fact, they said in 2020, a combination of climate change and pandemics will spell an interruption to the food supply that causes food prices to rise drastically. And due to countries taking, those pesky nationalists taking steps to protect their own domestic things, the food supply around the world, the global trade just locks up. And that, again, this is a script through which we are walking right now. And it's unfortunate that we find ourselves walking through those scenarios, but this is their imaginings. And so that's why part of the solution here is, John Rappaport actually talks a lot about this. The key weapon that we have in fighting these sorts of things is our own imagination. And so rather than just walking through the scenarios that they have imagined for us, we need to be conceiving what a new food system should look like. What is the future we want to be building and leaving to our kids? So that's fundamentally how we have to fight this.
It is fundamentally how we ought to fight this. You and I are 100% aligned on that. The thing that I'm always saying to people is we're creators. We're born of the Creator, divine and powerful. And all we have to do, instead of fighting these assholes and reacting to everything that they do, is be proactive and build and create the world that we want. Because we've been so docile for so long to just let people decide what to do, and we just kind of go along with it. And I think if people start to get their heads around that on a fundamental level, this whole thing could change very quickly. But in my opinion, we're very far from a tipping point. I just don't see right now a majority of people holding that attitude and saying, okay, what can we do now to change this?
I think you're right. And I think this is part of the reason, this is good news. Ultimately, this is part of the reason why they've had to do this balls to the wall, rolling everything out at the same time. The mask has really come out in 2020 with the pandemic, and then everything just started rushing. And especially on the food situation, I think part of the reason, there's a couple of reasons, but part of the reason that they're forced to run through everything as quickly as they can is because, just to catch people off guard so they don't have time to react. Yes. But also because particularly with food, it's just not that hard for us to turn this thing around. It doesn't take that many people at this stage of the game starting to grow food and saving seed so that, one plant yields hundreds or thousands of seeds. And so if a few of us that are coming to these, seeing what's going on and saying, this is out of control, we got to start growing food. If we do that, then it's entirely possible that, 12 months from now, when things still, again, are exponentially accelerating here, that a lot of other people are saying this is out of control. And as long as we are there with the tons of seeds that we've saved right now, right now you can't order seeds online. So it's falling to us, those of us who are watching this broadcast right now and having these conversations. It is incumbent on us to be growing food, saving seeds, and being there to arm the rest of the people that are waking up as we reach that turning point. Because it would only take a season or two for us to create what I'm calling an emergent, massively decentralized food system.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there are a lot of people out there who are leading in that charge.
Mhm.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the reset the table scenario. I'm probably not as familiar with that document as you are. I've looked at it a little bit. But can we talk about some of the things that they highlight and what you kind of see in it? Because I looked at it, and it, to me, it seemed like just another kind of virtue signaling thing around food sustainability and all that,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of buzzwords in there, but I didn't see as much. But again, I probably wasn't as thorough with it as you might have been. I didn't see as much blatant sort of call for cronyism and technocracy as I did in the scenarios of future development document in the Rockefeller Foundation.
Yeah, definitely. And again, at this level, they kind of spell out the agenda. The way that the technocrats use their language is it's very unique, right? They say, oh, we need to bring together stakeholders from a diverse
Stakeholders, always,
background and
yeah.
envision a sustainable future and
Mhm.
work to. But what that means is that there are conversations going on, not as in the open, where these stakeholders are coming together. And so, for example, the Rockefeller Foundation set the tone with that document. And of course, it all stems from the UN World Food System Summit. And then before that, the IPCC, the climate group at the UN,
Yep.
was saying you need to
Yep.
eat bugs for climate change. But it sort of becomes more and more concrete as it rolls down. After the Rockefellers reset the food, and you can, in the document, it lists the participants that were invited to give input into this document, and you can go down the list of multinational companies, people from the UN itself, and other think tanks.
Yeah.
And actually, I did a graph connecting all of these people to the other. It's pretty staggering the way all these agendas don't just link together conceptually. It is literally the same people doing these things.
Same old geezers
Across the
doing the
board.
same old thing. Where did you share that? Did you put that on your Telegram channel recently?
Not recently. I'll dig and pull it up in a bit here. But so the Rockefellers did their document, and then towards the end of last year, I think it was in December, Barilla, like the multinational pasta company, hosted an event called it was actually resetting the table from farm to fork. It was almost like taking the names of the Rockefeller and the EU policies,
Yeah.
and putting it all in one title. And the CEO of Barilla gets up there and says, yeah, this is, he's open. This is really going to start the conversation, which will feed into the UN World Food System Summit, which is going on right now, and which has a ton of the Gates Foundation involvement in it. And so they really just started this ball rolling. But to get back to your question about what the Rockefeller Foundation's Reset the Table document laid out, it was primarily making the case for why we need to take over the food supply, why this is suddenly a big issue. Because for decades, right, the Rockefeller petrochemical-based agriculture ignored all aspects of nutrition. We just tried to pump out empty calories using monocropping at scale, and that was their focus. And so in the months after the pandemic, this was kind of their little bit of a mea culpa, like, oops, looks like we got it wrong. Looks like it actually does matter what you eat. Somehow that is related to the way your body works. Oops. And so now that we have this global pandemic, this huge existential crisis of public health, and then given that it actually does turn out that it matters what you eat, as we roll out medical martial law, so too do we need to take more control over the food system. And so they've married these two worlds now because they want control of both. And so that was sort of the main MO of that Rockefeller agenda. And then, of course, they went on to spell a few directives, like a radical expansion of the EBT, the SNAP benefits, that's food stamps. It takes different names in different parts of the world, but it's basically a universal basic income in the form of food. So just, chipping away towards global communism. They also describe, and this is, I had trouble even covering this, even though that Rockefeller Reset the Table agenda is very clear about funding a minority-owned food system. And I don't even want to talk about it. We all eat, and so we shouldn't have to talk about racial things, but they were very clear. And so in the first days now of the Biden-Harris administration, not only have they done that expansion of the food stamps, that's already happened. They just going down the Rockefellers, checking the boxes.
Yeah.
But they also just yesterday announced that they will be paying off all the USDA loans for minority farmers to the tune of 120%, which, you don't have to be good at math to realize that means they're not only just paying off the loan completely, they're then giving free money to minority farmers. So over the last decade, it's been really hard for farmers to make a profit. A lot of loans have been taken out. They've sort of driven everybody into the ground collectively. And now they're only extending lifelines to minority farmers. So that's a weird, I'd rather not even talk about race. But that's just you can't ignore that they are very much pursuing a South Africa-like agenda here.
Yes.
Biden Congress sort of.
Exactly. It very much South Africa, as you said. I mean, I've been in the agriculture scene for 10 years and traveled around the US, spoken at many conferences, and also a lot of, before I woke up to the climate change thing, a lot of environmentalist conferences and all that. And I've seen this, and most of the people that are into this stuff, they just genuinely believe that it's all good, that they're helping people, and they're all in it. They're all in it for the right reasons, but they just don't. They're useful idiots in a way. They're being led by things that they don't understand. And this is one thing that I really am seeing in the small scale farming movement, is this whole division of this whole thing about identity politics. This has just been thrown at the doorstep of this whole scene. And I even talked a little bit about yesterday, this movement of farmers that went after Joel Salatin. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with Joel. And, it's just this white privilege conversation, all this kind of stuff. And this is straight out of the history books. If you're familiar with what happened in Stalinist Russia, when they started to create this propaganda campaign against the group that were called the kulaks, which is basically anybody that was somewhat of a successful farmer. We've seen this stuff before, the demonization of the successful farmers and the glorification of the sort of the peasant agrarian farmer. And so this script is rolled out. And when they started to go and round up kulaks in the countryside, they essentially killed all the successful farmers. And then what happened? They starved, because you go and you kill all the farmers. Who's actually going to grow the food? And sure, it's great to have minorities and everybody in agriculture. But the fact of the matter is, that aside, the majority of farmers in the United States are white. It's just a fact, right? Mm-hmm. And so some people don't like that. Whatever, it is what it is. But you go and now create all these incentive programs to basically demonize white farmers, which are the vast majority, and then glorify people and give people who are just getting into farming because of the color of their skin, giving them money, getting them in there. I've seen how affirmative action plays out in agriculture, and it's not good. And South Africa is a prime example, because they did it there. They basically took all this land and machinery. And I know a decent amount of people in South Africa, and I've heard these stories firsthand. They went in and seized all the assets of these successful farmers that, Afrikaner people, which I believe they're Dutch in heritage originally, that had a long history of agriculture. And then they give this land and all this infrastructure to these literally peasant farmers. And I've seen videos people sent to me from firsthand from people that I've got to know down there, of literally black farmers, again, not trying to play the race game, but that's just what it is, in the field with picks, where they've just threw all these people on this land, and it's a farm that has fully functioning post-harvest infrastructure, huge infrastructure to do large-scale commodity agriculture, for better or worse, whatever that is. But then they've got peasant farmers in there tilling the soil with picks, because they don't know how to operate the machinery and they don't know how to use the farm. And so that's insane.
That's the only way you can put it. Yeah, and you're right. There's a lot of parallels. It is entirely a Soviet-style takeover, and of course, as they purged the kulaks, that led to the Holodomor, a mass. I mean, we're talking about, it's a harrowing story. You don't even want to think about tens of millions of people starving, but that's how the Holodomor played out. And you can bet that the funding that they're providing to anyone, but particularly to these BIPOCs that we're talking about, which is Black, Indigenous, and people of color, that's the acronym that they use in their woke literature, isn't going to go to new organic farmers. We're talking about new bug farms and robotic, automated, AI-driven operations. So it's not, there's really nothing altruistic about what's going on here. And then you had on screen the Rockefeller agenda. Just to return to that, another aspect of this is they talk about using true cost accounting. And what this means is rather than use, objective reality and try and make dollars in exchange for goods, or, economic reality, true cost accounting means we're going to impose our technocratic imaginations on you. We're going to invent cow farts and then say that the true cost of raising a cow is actually much higher because of the social cost, that there's methane in cow farts. And so it's very expensive to the rest of society for you to keep a cow. And so they impose this fake, I will call it fake cost accounting, onto farmers. And as an illustration of this, the University of Sheffield released a study towards the middle of last year that said, sheep farmers in the UK could make more money if they stopped farming sheep. It makes no economic sense whatsoever because there's no goods being grown. But by virtue of carbon offsets paid to these farmers, then, literally we're going to pay farmers to stop farming.
Then that comes right out of Agenda 21. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
And that was called, I believe it was called the Rewilding project or something like that.
You're absolutely right. In the name of biodiversity, it plays into this biodiversity initiative where the UK, Boris said we're going to rewild 30% of our land and kick the farms off, put trees there, kick the people off, and put them back into the cities, which are going to devolve into smart cities. One of the first actions of the Biden-Harris administration has been to echo Boris and implement a 30-30 plan here, 30% of the land, 30% of the water being rewilded, being redirected back to nature. And of course, those numbers are coming straight down from the UN. You hear the Pope echoing them. So it's all one agenda across the board.
It's unbelievable.
And and so there's a $30 billion annual fund that the Trump administration was using to help farmers especially through the trade war with China. Like we said, it's been really financially difficult on farmers for some time now. And so one of the only ways, and I mean this, that farmers have remained solvent, not even profitable, but just, still alive, producing over the last few years is by virtue of some of these $30 billion a year being redirected to farmers' aid. One of the first actions, again, that the Biden-Harris administration has taken was to immediately redirect these funds from the farm aid into what they call climate change help. And you can bet, as he promised during their campaigning, that this is going to take the farm up. He literally said, we're going to pay farmers, the same thing, we're going to pay farmers just to put their land into conservation and rewild it. So yeah, we are paying farmers to stop growing food, to stop raising animals. And all of this was spelled out by virtue of that Rockefeller Reset the Table agenda.
Wow. And in your opinion, is the Bill Gates move with the 250,000 acres that he bought? Do you think that's what's going on with that?
Do I think? Well, yeah, certainly. I think he doesn't intend to farm himself, right? I think he bought up 250,000 acres, and which, by the way, makes him the largest private landowner of farmland in the United States.
Which is he's more than Ted Turner now, because it was Ted Turner, I believe, before it was Bill Gates.
Mm-hmm. Warren Buffett has been on that list. He divested of some. Bezos has absolutely got a ton of it as well. So yeah, somehow the billionaires really love their farmland. I think you're right that it's partly that they want to take the land out of production, but I also think that it's more a wedge so that they are now a stakeholder, right? If I own the most farmland in the world, or in the US, then suddenly I have some authority. Like I can say,
right,
look, I'm going to do this with my land. You should be doing it too. I'm going to turn this into a carbon sink and stop growing to save the world. And you sort of, set the tone for the way that the rest of the nation should be going.
Right. So, and that's a really good observation. And it also really lines up with Bill Gates' MO from, I believe it was the was it in late 90s or early 2000s when his reputation just went down the toilet. He got that pie in the face.
Yep.
People started just because Windows is such a gong show and he had all these back doors, and it was basically just a scam to sell you solutions for viruses that they created. He started to get a lot of pressure on him back then, and then his reputation went down the toilet, and then he did a good old switcheroo and turned himself into a philanthropist, which was the boilerplate of, was it J.D. Rockefeller, who did the exact same thing. Yep. Right? He was this robber baron and everybody hated him, and then all of a sudden he turned into a philanthropist. He had the media follow him around. He went and handed out nickels and pennies to the peasants on the street, and they flipped his image. And so they're doing it they don't have any new ideas. These people, they just do the same thing over and over again.
It's a very astute observation. Yeah, it's the same, exactly the same script being played out over and over. And of course, he crashed the market and set the stage for the Federal Reserve Bank to be introduced. So yeah, no, Bill Gates flipped his image, started investing heavily into vaccines and saying we need to save the world by virtue of that. Announced that his investments into vaccines would pay off. Now he's doing the same thing with fake meat, and he actually made the claim that those things are going to pay off drastically because he knows he's in on the agenda. He knows they're ending animal agriculture. The CEO of Impossible Foods, which is funded by Bill Gates, is very open. Their mission statement is to end animal agriculture. So they're not secretive about it at all. They're very, very open. It's pretty wild.
It is. It's unbelievable. So do you think, so you mentioned that, was it the Farm Aid bill from Trump? What was that one that you mentioned? He had some kind of program that was helping farmers.
Yeah, the USDA has for a long time now had some funds set aside for various purposes, and under Trump, those were directed as farm aid to farmers, especially during the trade war, just to keep them afloat, to help them survive, so that we still had food production going on. Yeah, and yeah, now Biden has redirected that to his climate change initiatives.
He's redirected it. Okay, so in your opinion, was Trump genuinely trying to kind of create a Fortress America, basically create America to be its own independent food producer? It seemed like it was, certainly from an energy perspective, but do you think that that's what he was doing with food as well?
That's a can of worms.
It is. Yeah, I realize that.
Yeah, there were certainly some superficial things that, I don't mean to say superficial. There were actions that one could point at to make that case. There were also, and I think this is important, there were also things that were going on under the Trump administration that never deviated at all from this plan, right? It's been decades and decades and generations in the making. Things like the funding of quantum AI to take over, to do, even in the name of food, right? And doing food research using quantum AI was highly funded under Trump. So there were it's like there were bones thrown that we can point at and believe in if you stop there. But there was also a lot of evidence that none of these things actually stopped developing under his administration.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, I'm sort of a political atheist. I don't the whole thing is bullshit to me, whether it's left or right. But it is interesting, and maybe it's just all a show. Maybe there's the theory that the whole Trump thing was just a patriot appeasement program to kind of allow certain moving parts to kind of get going in the background, and so that the patriots kind of laid back, and now Biden comes in, now all those things are in place, and now it's just a massive acceleration of what was already there. It's so hard to actually see, because I mean, there's just so much secrecy to all this, but it is amazing how as soon as Biden got in, the acceleration has just been unbelievable.
Yeah.
And it even seems that way here in Canada. I mean, Canada is a corporation registered on the United States Securities Exchange Commission. That's playing out in the open. You go into company filings and look that up. What happens in the United States happens here. And it's so interesting because there's been this agenda here in Canada ever since Trudeau came in for the second time. But now, ever since Biden in the United States, things are accelerating up here just as much as they are down there for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, this was the green light for basically the globalists, the technocrats, whatever you want to call, New World Order, sees that they have achieved control across the board right now. They see a green light to move ahead with this great reset. They see no material resistance to it whatsoever, no meaningful resistance. Some people are seeing it, some people are upset about it, but they don't see anyone that's able to stop them right now. You mentioned how much things have accelerated under Biden. Another example of that was, of course, putting Tom Vilsack back at the USDA, who's a disaster.
The old crony the old Monsanto buddy that Obama had in place, right?
That's right. Yeah, the guy. Yeah, he greenlit every Monsanto creation you can imagine, GMO, all these things. But one of these first things that was done was establishing the goal of having the USDA establish a net zero carbon food system. And we've seen and explored a little bit about what that means, because major multinationals like Walmart have been talking about, we want a zero carbon supply chain. And so if you are an indoor bug farm, that's great. We can take your product, we'll put it on our shelves. But if you raise cattle, that's a no-go at this point, because probably some carbon was involved or some methane emissions when those cows were farting, and we're not going to give you shelf space on them. You no longer are going to have a market for your goods anymore. And so doing that now at the institutional level, at the USDA level, rather than just through their monopoly crony capitalist level, is going to even further put pressure on producers. And then there was a new FDA rule. I just did a video about this last night, so it's still very fresh though. A new FDA rule that actually said, if you are selling crops, we need to have the GPS coordinate in order to be able to trace food, because like we've said, food is dirty and dangerous. And we've seen outbreaks, and especially leafy greens, get recalled and things like that. So they've been pushing that in the media. People have been seeing, oh man, I can't eat lettuce or I'll get listeria or salmonella or whatever. And so this new FDA proposed rule says, when you sell your crops, we need to have spreadsheets of the exact GPS coordinates of every piece of lettuce that you harvested, the time, date, and location of where it was harvested, when it was cooled, where it was packaged, how it was washed, when you sold it, when it was used as another ingredient in something else. I mean, they want every piece of data you can imagine. And this speaks ultimately to what IBM and the World Economic Forum have been describing as the AI and blockchain-based supply chain, which tracks everything. This is the codification of Agenda 2030, right? We want to be able to track and trace every resource on the planet at all times, who's eating it, where it's going, how it got there. And so this is it rolling out. They're going to first, right now the FDA rule says that you need to keep it in spreadsheets, but it's really obviously that's entirely impossible to keep 7 trillion spreadsheets at farms everywhere of the GPS coordinates of every piece of lettuce.
Exactly.
So really this is just, we want the data, and that creates the problem, which means we have to have, no one can keep that many spreadsheets. So we will have to have this blockchain based system, the one that we've already heard from IBM and, the World Economic Forum about how good it is and how it's going to make our lives better. And now we see that this is rolling out. They've paved the way for it. And the other thing that's really important about the way that this FDA rule is crafted is, while it has certain exemptions for small operations, if you have less than 20K of revenue or less than 3,000 hens, whatever it is, then you are supposed to be exempt. But the requirements are still on it's called the first receivers. The people that buy from producers have to have the data. And if that's the case, then that would mean that the producers have to have the data. So
that means that everybody downstream from their supply chain is screwed.
That's exactly right. It's the same play as Walmart made when they said, we're not going to put your products on our shelves unless you're zero carbon. It puts the onus back on the farmers. So even though it carved out an exemption, it's irrelevant, because you have lost your market unless you have some way of keeping track of the GPS location of every piece of lettuce on your farm and when it was harvested. Really, this also spells that you have to use automation at this point. You have to tag every piece of lettuce. You have to have these crop harvesting robots and some level of automation on your farm. And again, this all kills off the small producer,
because it just makes everything. It makes the barrier to entry to get in the game so complicated. And that article I was just sharing there for a second is, you were talking about stuff in the United States, but this is an exact example of how what happens down in the United States happens here in Canada, because it's all the same shit. They're doing the exact same thing in British Columbia, which is where I'm from, to livestock. So this is going to completely just rule out the small producers. And this has been the trend for years. In British Columbia here, we have a crony organization called the Agricultural Land Commission, which is this Marxist land grab where they've put all this a lot of the farmland into this thing called the Agricultural Land Reserve. And it's been the trend for years to basically just layer on the regulations and the statutes. And so this is one of these patterns that, if people can understand this, I think it's so effective if farmers understand this, especially, is that you understand what they do. And what they do at a fundamental level is the pile of paper only ever gets bigger. So the regulations, the statutes, the codes, it only ever gets bigger. So you need gatekeepers to navigate the system. And so it doesn't matter what sector we're talking about. It's literally the same in all sectors. It's just really, really unfortunate for farmers because farmers don't have time to sit there and comb through mountains of paperwork to figure out if they can put up a pole barn, or if they can move their cows to the side of this field that is in a different zone classification, or whatever it is, or if they can. The typical one that I've seen with farmers for over the years is, I want to build a secondary home so that, I'm the son of 3 generations of farmers, and my parents granted me the farm, and now I've got kids and I want to keep my parents on the farm. So I want to build an in-law suite for my parents so they can stay there and retire, be close to my kids, and we can have this beautiful communal relationship on the farm, which is how it should be. And you can't do that because they regulate the piss out of it. And if people can understand at a fundamental level, that's the game. So you don't necessarily need to go and look for specific things. You just have to understand that whatever the bureaucracy is in that sector, they continuously make it more and more complicated to disincentivize people out. And what it does effectively, and this is exactly part of Agenda 21 and 2030, is it knocks out all the small producers, because essentially the paperwork gets so bad that you almost need to have a full-time individual on your operation managing that. And for large producers, they already have that.
Yep.
So it's just, assigning a job to maybe somebody who might have been an accounts payable or accounts receivable person or whatever to now manage this, and they can do that. The infrastructure is already there. But for the small family farm to now go and be accounting for every vegetable that comes off the farm, every animal that comes off the farm, and tagging everything. Oh, now I've got to get this AI system. It's the same old racket. They just continuously do it. And it blows my mind that farmers keep falling for it. And that's the thing that really breaks my heart with this, because I've been working with farmers for so long, and they just keep going for it. And they try to navigate this stuff. I think fundamentally we have to go at a principled level and realize that all of these institutions are exactly what is destroying every sector that we're in, to make room for the big boys and make room for the small boys. And the other thing that I see in a principled way, looking at these patterns, is that if you look at it from the perspective of a controller, so think about the czar of agriculture, whatever it is. It's way easier from your position to manage 5 organizations and delegate to 5 organizations than it is to 5 million. And so if you look at it from just an incentive perspective, that incentive guides everything they do, because it's just simply easier for them to centralize everything and have just a few people that they have to deal with than having, 5 or 50 million small farmers doing their own thing independently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you're right. The requirements are such that you have to have an operation at a scale, which, as we know, is necessarily an unhealthy, monocropping at scale is an unhealthy, unsustainable practice. So that, yeah, it's just an attack. There's another thing that Biden did in his first few days of office was implementing some changes to the tax code. I've heard a lot of people talk about the changes to the tax code and the effects it'll have in other areas, but there is a really critical effect on farms. You mentioned this is part of the way that Americana, but farms in general, I should say, are passed on from one generation to the next. And these changes to the tax code basically make it impossible to do that. They make it so that you have to pay off the capital gains on the farm at the time of inheritance. And a lot of farmers, like we've said, they're under financial attack. They're barely solvent, and their land values their land values have skyrocketed. So these people are land rich, but money poor. And if you're trying to inherit a farm, there's no way you can pay the capital gains taxes on an unrealized gain for your $6 million farm that your dad's leaving to you. You just can't do it. You are forced to sell the farm off to Bill Gates so that he can continue building up. So it's a mad land grab. And you also mentioned
that's unreal.
It is. It's insane. It's
so criminal. It's so criminal. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's gut-wrenching, and it makes my heart hurt at what's going on right now. You mentioned also the livestock registration, and I just want to mention, I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff in here.
Oh, it's great.
And I do want to get back to the commodities shortage as well, because that's also all of these. We're surrounded. We're being attacked on all fronts. But the livestock registrations, it's not just a, certainly it's not just a safety issue. This is, whenever you give the government information, it's because they intend to use it against you. And we're not speculating when we say that, because we can see already in the UK, under these bird flu outbreaks, there was one around Kent where I heard from a number of people that lived around the area of this poultry farm. It's one of these factory farms. They're disgusting. They should be eliminated once we have a sustainable, distributed system. There was a bird flu outbreak, they claimed, and so the agency there, which is called DEFRA, literally went, Curtis, door to door, gassing people's chickens because they wanted to stop the spread of this bird flu pandemic. They were killing people's chickens in their backyard, and the way that they knew where those chickens were is because they had already passed mandatory registration of your flocks, again, for safety, for your safety, to stop these bird flu outbreaks. So it's just unspeakable what's going on right now.
Wow, it's the openness of their corruption is unbelievable. I saw somebody in the comments says that Biden is going to be good for small farmers. It's like, what universe do you live in? This is absolute full-fledged technocracy, especially as installing the old czar of Monsanto back in there was just, it's such a blatant move. Mm-hmm. But yeah, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some of these commodity food issues that you see coming down.
The only way he could be good for small farmers, and it's not just him, right? It's just, in fact, he's a totally empty vessel, is that these kinds of things, if you require the GPS coordinates of every piece of lettuce, it's totally undoable, right? We've passed that line at this point. And so we're seeing the divergence of food production into the technocratic system eventually with their blockchain, and then what will ultimately be a black market of food system. And so one could argue that is a necessary thing right now, that this is the direction we have to go. We have to divorce ourselves from these toxic centralized control systems. And so certainly they're accelerating that. That's the only way I could possibly see.
Well, it's actually a good point. Before we talk about commodities, let's just talk about this for a second, because that was my initial impulse when it looked like the deal was sealed with Biden, is that, okay, well, now the technocracy is out in plain sight. Perhaps with Trump, it was lurking in the shadows of the deep state, and it wasn't so blaringly obvious of all what the agenda was. But now it's like, this is full on. I mean, it's like 50 executive orders he signed already. I mean, they were screaming "Orange Man bad," fascist Nazi for the last 4 years. Meanwhile, Biden comes in and all he does is sign executive orders. It's just like everything that Trump was accused of for the last 4 years, Biden has proved to be in the last 3 weeks, where it's just nonstop. It's almost like a living meme, the pile of executive orders on his desk. He's just sitting there, and you've had some hot mics where he's like, I don't even know what I'm signing. It's like unbelievable.
It's out of control.
Well, and I'm somewhat optimistic in that perhaps in this journey that we're all on together, that we need to be shaken to the core, and it needs to be blaringly obvious to everybody to unite on that front. And perhaps what you said about the black market is that it's just going to require a lot of people to basically just say, nope, not doing that anymore.
Yeah. And, I would encourage people to take a look at the whole counter economic idea of doing things through bartering or exchange directly, not taking part in what ultimately is devolving into a beast system where you have to take part of it. So again, save those seeds and start trading directly with people in your neighborhoods and your communities, supporting local producers who are, as we can see, being squeezed out of the market right now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. So let's talk about some commodity stuff happening right now.
Sure. So, a few months back, I kind of stuck my head out on a limb, whatever the expression is there, because the data was very compelling, and I was starting to hear a little bit of buzz from industry insiders that, we're running out of soybeans, and we live in a reality where people it just doesn't occur to people anymore. They go to the supermarket, there's always a multicolored assortment of fruits and vegetables, and it's just, if you read about the Great Famine in China, there's a term that they use that is the illusion of superabundance. And it looks a lot like, again, it's one of these echoes. It looks a lot like what happened there, where the communists wanted to please the people in the party. So they kept over-reporting their grain stocks. And then that meant that they kept exporting. We will never run out of grains. We'll just keep exporting. And eventually they went into those silos and they found them empty. And again, tens of millions of people starved as a result of that. And so, as we said, the USDA has been over-reporting the stocks, has been under-reporting the crop losses. And certainly China has been buying hand over fist. This is really the big thing here, is that China has been importing record levels of everything. And that was already the case leading into last week. And then last week was off the charts. They actually purchased more corn than they have ever purchased in any year in history just last week. So this is almost incomprehensible to think of hundreds of tons of corn being purchased over the course of a few days.
And where was that corn coming from? U.S.?
Absolutely, yeah, from the U.S. I should say.
Yeah.
It's absolutely coming out of the U.S. And so they have siphoned off the food supply. Brazil ran out of soybeans months ago. You can see their export numbers were high and then dropped to zero because they're gone. And as a result of this, and as was just spelled out in the food chain reaction simulation game that we talked about, nations are taking steps to protect their domestic food supplies.
Yes.
We've seen Brazil run out of soybeans. We've seen Argentina, though, limit their exports. Of course, they had a drought there. This ties back to the solar minimum that we've talked about before, plus La Nina, both conspiring to mean that they had a very dry season and a terrible crop. So Argentina took steps at the behest of their livestock producers. The coverage of this says that the stated goal of Argentina's limiting their exports was to guarantee internal supply for their domestic animal protein supply chain. So Argentina did, because they love their meat in Argentina. So Argentina did that. Russia limited their exports, and they're the number one exporter. Ukraine limited their grain exports, again, after the agricultural minister was petitioned by the livestock producers union. So there's this theme of livestock producers seeing feed costs rise as these grain shortages materialize, and saying, hey, if you want to be able to feed your people, we need to be able to feed our animals. And that means that we need to hold on to our grains. Other countries around the world, like the ones we just enumerated, are taking those steps to protect their food supplies, but certainly not so in Canada and the US. We are just allowing everyone else to siphon off the entire... What's up?
It's just letting it go.
Yeah, no, we are subsidizing the rest of the world, and whether that's because of or both because of the illusion of superabundance, this idea that we'll never run out. After all, the U.S. is a top producer of a lot of these things, and so it just seems inconceivable that we could ever run out of food. Or whether it's because there are enemies within who are crooking the books at the USDA to make it look like we've got more than we have. And I think it's partly both of these things, especially after we've seen these serial write-downs of our grain stocks. But that has kept prices suppressed so that the other countries, especially China, but also Mexico, could keep buying our grains at suppressed prices. And that also keeps price rationing from working, right? When prices are low, people keep buying. What's supposed to happen when you run out of something is that the price goes up, and then people say, I can't really afford that anymore. But for two reasons, this isn't working. One, because as we said, the USDA is lying, and so it looks like we have a ton, so the prices stay low. But also because even now that the shortages are becoming apparent and the prices have started to kick up a bit, China knows what's going on. They know that they're already facing food security issues internally, and that there's a global supply shortage. So they don't care. They don't care how much it costs. They're going to keep buying. So again, price rationing isn't working. And that's why it's just been, like we said, record purchases on top of record purchases. And we now are in a situation, yes, where we're short. You never, as the ag analysts will say, you never actually run out of beans. What happens is you run out of $12 soybeans, and then you run out of $14 soybeans, and then maybe you run out of $16 soybeans. And at some point, it is cost prohibitive for the producers of animal feed, and then in turn passing on the cost to livestock producers. It becomes cost prohibitive for you to even feed your animals already. And this has already happened. Prices of livestock feed have jumped up 20%. I saw Arlen Suderman, who's an agricultural economist, pretty well-known guy, say, if I were a livestock producer, I would be worried sick right now. I'd be off. He said on a scale of 1 to 10, I would be at 12 worried about what's going on right now with these commodity shortages, because it's going to be impossible to keep your animals, which again, Curtis, let's just tie it all back together, is part of the attack on animal agriculture.
Absolutely.
When they have devised this scenario that causes animal feed prices to explode through the roof, they know that what's happening now will happen, that people will be forced to liquidate their herds. And so we've got a glut of protein hitting the market. Meat prices are actually coming down because people are just saying, screw it, I can't feed my animals anymore.
I can't do it.
And so right now we've got a glut of protein hitting the market, and then soon that will give way to very real shortages. So this whole thing is playing out just as, one would expect, just as we talked about months ago and last year that it would. And it is sadly, becoming a worst case scenario.
It is literally, we have a copy of Jeff Berwick's new book, The Controlled Demolition of America. That's literally what this is. When I look at the macro, I mean, these New World Order cronies have been trying to break down America literally, and they've been doing that through legislation for over 100 years now. But they're also doing it just to break down the idea of America, because really at this point, all America is this idea of a place where there's freedom and it's a place to go. It seems to me like they want to destroy America on every front, including the idea, because the idea is really just the last frontier. Because, the Constitution was gone in 1871. All vestige of real freedom has been stripped from America's. We joke about it up here in Canada. It's no longer the land of the free and home of the brave. It's the land of the fees and the home of the slaves. Mm-hmm. America is one of the most enslaved nations in the world, yet a lot of these patriots still cling to this idea that it's this great free country, when there's a damn rule and a code and a fee for everything you do. And I just hope that more Americans wake up, because I still believe in the spirit. I still believe in the American spirit. We share that very much up here in Canada. We're very culturally tied at the hip. And my hope is that people just start to really put this into practice, because the thing that a lot of people don't realize is, okay, right now you just laid out what's going on with industrial commodity agriculture. You and I probably don't need any of that stuff. But what happens, but the fact of the matter is, that is still 99% of the food system, whether we like to believe it or not. Exactly. Local, small scale organic is not, it's a fart in the wind in the cosmos of time. It's insignificant. I hate to say that, but it's practically true. So what happens when all these commodities that are all the commodity crap food that you eat at Walmart, what happens when those disappear? Well, then if people are hungry, they're going to go for any food that exists anywhere, regardless of price. So what happens to the local food system? This is the issue that people need to start really realizing, and why, if you're not growing food and actively engaged in some kind of food security mechanism right now, you're not contributing to the solution.
Yeah, and it's not just, I think we've made clear a few times today, it's not just the U.S., but the shortage situation. I saw Canada is running out of canola, which is an oilseed crop. And so we can imagine situations very easily where the price of bread, which the vast majority of bread is using these vegetable oils to be produced. So even the price of, it's not just the meat that we're talking about, right? This flows in, soybeans are in everything. These vegetable oils are in everything. It's used for baking and frying and packaging up sardines. And there's a long list of the ways that these kinds of oils are used. And so, food prices across the board will be exploding here.
Yeah.
And and you're exactly right that while the organic farming socially it's important, it is still statistically insignificant. And so when the bulk of the food supply runs out, then we're going to lose the security on the streets, is the bottom line.
Oh, it's crazy. And wow, we got 1,100 people tuning in here, folks. We're not trying to just doom and gloom. Christian and I are both very interested in solutions, but I feel that it's important to be aware of reality, of what's around you, so that you know how to act, and these things can guide your decisions to move forward. I wonder, Christian, if a big part of what's going on in a really macro perspective, we can talk about China and how it seems to me like there's been an absolute Chinese infiltration of Western culture for a very long time.
Mhm.
I've seen that through the propaganda. We even have actual statutes in Canada here that we have one called the Foreign Investment Protection Act that was signed in 2014 that literally gives China carte blanche to come here, take control of natural resources. They don't have to play the game of being concerned about environmental damage. They even have legal indemnity and are even allowed to position soldiers in Canada, which is actually happening now. There's a lot of reports coming in about that. People have been blowing the whistle on this for a while, but that was all laid out in 2014 under Stephen Harper, which a lot of conservative Canadians think was the greatest conservative prime minister that ever existed. But he was all part of the same game. But I wonder if we just really look at the macro of it all, is that, you know, you could even say, oh, then there's somebody controlling China, which I'm sure is true.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, China's a massive population with very little natural resources anymore. And I wonder if in some way that's really what's going on here in some way or another, is that China's got a lot of people, and it's also got a growing population of middle class that now want to consume more stuff than they did when they were peasant agrarians, and they need somewhere to get that stuff.
I think there's some truth to that. First of all, I would agree certainly that China is just being used as an instrument of the larger global agenda. So I don't, and you know, gosh, somebody actually accused me of being racist against the Chinese people the other day. I was like, you got to be kidding! Like, you know, the U.S. If that were true, I would hate Americans because the U.S. has sent the CIA into basically every country on earth to do a takedown. So no, this has nothing. Again, this has nothing to do with race. We all have to eat. And I would say that, you know, China is not immune to this depopulation agenda. We've seen African swine fever just race across the herds of China, eliminated 60% of their hog herds in 2019, and they've been rapidly trying to rebuild that. Although, again, rebuilding it in their image, right? All of the small Chinese hog farmers that had it in their backyard and fed whatever they had on their operations, that's all gone now. They were all killed off, and there was evidence that. Well, they called it, you know, Chinese gangs, but that used drones to drop infected carcasses around and spread African swine fever. I don't know if I would believe that. I would actually suggest that we should at least consider the idea that it was probably the Chinese Communist government themselves who was doing this to destroy off the small farms. It's the same thing, right? It's this war on small producers. In any event, they are now rebuilding those herds, but they're doing it all in the indoor factory farm, high tech, you know, hog farms. And that means they're consuming a lot more soybeans. This is part of the reason they've had this ravenous appetite for as many soybeans as they can get their hands on. But no, I don't think that China will be saved by virtue of sabotaging the rest of the world. I think that's part of the part of what's going on here, part of the justification, perhaps part of the illusion. But I mean, they're just as much in the ringer as all of us. Yeah,
absolutely. And one thing, you know, I always like to try to think about scenarios based on the perspective of other people involved in that scenario. And just like how I said earlier with the people who control, or at least want to control everything, is they want to have things simplified. And there's really no greater threat to the status quo or the establishment than the small family farm. Because if you have a society where if we had a society, and we've certainly been there in the past in history, history has really been led by farmers in many ways. If you have a scenario where the vast majority of people are in control of their food, water, shelter, or even energy, what do you need a government for?
Exactly.
Right. And so it's one of these things that I just like to fall back to first principles, is just like, look at it from that perspective. Yes, the small farmer is one of the greatest threats to this system. And thereby, one of the greatest things you can or should do is take control of those things. And yeah, you can bring that out, just like the zones of permaculture. You can extend that out as far as you want, but really fundamentally, taking control of your food on a local level is got to be the greatest step people can take.
Absolutely. I can't agree enough. You know, I will never forget Bill Mollison standing up in one of his lectures and saying, there's something inherently seditious about permaculture, isn't there? Because a man who can grow his own food and produce his own needs doesn't need a state at that point. And that's absolutely true. And so that's why I suggest that we all have to start growing our own food. It's not just because, oh, it's obviously you do need to feed your family, but it's not that at all. It's not a defensive thing. It is, as you said, the single biggest threat to this entire agenda is a fully self-sufficient people. You imagine, we've heard the expression, America couldn't be invaded ever because there's a gun behind every blade of grass.
Right.
But by the same logic, if there were a garden, a victory garden, you call it what you want, in every home, then this takeover of the food supply would be a folly. They would be no one would need their fake lab-grown meat and all these things. That's why we've seen this war on the producers. That's why we're seeing the case being made that growing things, especially organic farming, is dirty and dangerous and contributes to pandemics. So they got to shut that down. And I do want to reference, I did a talk a couple weeks ago at the Greater Reset Conference.
Yes.
That was entitled The Greater Food Transformation, because that's another one of their words that they use, is the Great Food Transformation, now that you're all going to be eating bugs. But this talk, The Greater Food Transformation, it really explored in depth why we all need to be growing our own food and what happens when we do that. You mentioned, it's exactly what you said about the permaculture zones expanding outwards. It does start with each of us taking steps for our own food security. And then by virtue of that, it just happens organically. It's emergent that the communities around us are empowered, that we have seeds and spare eggs. There's such abundance when you start doing these things that it just flows from you organically outwards. And so that talk looks at how a decentralized system really does emerge naturally by virtue of us all doing the right things, growing food.
Absolutely. I've had this experience for 12 years now in my journey into urban agriculture. And I found when I was running my farm commercially, I had up to 20 different plots at one time. And I found every place that I had a garden, every place that I had a different little micro farm site, was almost like a hub that attracted people to it. And then they went out and did the same thing. So I've had, dozens of different garden plots around the city of Kelowna for the years that I've been doing this. And I'm no longer commercially farming right now. It's more homesteading. But every time I had a garden, people would come and talk to me and they'd be, wow, you're planting right now in March. The conventional thinking is you can't really plant until mid-May. And you would basically by osmosis teach people. And that's what I would say to anybody who's sitting here listening to this and thinking, well, maybe I should be gardening, is you should be gardening everywhere. And you should be gardening as much in the open as possible so that people see it, because it's important that people see it. Because when people see a garden, they walk by. And I've never in my life, I know I've interacted with tens of thousands of people in my community when I was farming, selling at farmers markets and just in my gardens. People walk by and they just go, wow, what a great idea. Why would I have a lawn? Why would I waste effort doing all this? And it's quite contagious that people just see it and they go, yeah, that just makes sense, especially now.
Yeah. And another thing I want to throw out here is that it's not just, I think, like we've said, food production is sort of a baseline, but so too is there a role for everyone from different walks of life, from different backgrounds and experiences. We do need lawyers out there to try and pass ordinances at the local levels that keep this war on small producers from succeeding, right? So trying to, there was a bill, it's actually 1776 in Florida that said, there were some cities that had passed laws that said you can't have gardens, you have to have lawns because property values and grass is pretty, or whatever. Just who can even imagine why you wouldn't be allowed to grow food? But that was there. And so there was actually this bill was floated to say, no, you're not allowed to stop people from growing food. There's another bill in Wyoming. I can't remember the number right now, but it said, during the pandemic last year, when the USDA meat packing plants were being shut down and producers were having to kill off their animals because they had nowhere to take them to market, Wyoming actually took the step of saying, no, you can't do this. We have to be able to take meat from producers to consumers. And so we're going to carve out a special exception for animal shares here. And if you've seen like these dairy shares where you pay for your share of a goat at the beginning of a season, and then you get milk from the goat from the farmer once a week or whatever. It did that same thing for cows. So you bought a share of a cow, and then at the when the animal was harvested, you get your animal. And because of this loophole that they carved out, this exception, it didn't have to go through that bottleneck of the USDA regulatory red tape which was shut down anyway and was stopping the rest of the country from harvesting their meat. And so these are these are two examples. First of all, I want to share because we can all be taking these kinds of things and trying to get them done in our own local levels. But also to make that illustration that we do need lawyers, we do need local
all fronts
governance. Everything. We do need people who are politically active to make the case and go around and spread the word about these things. We need people who are technically adept to go stand up new websites for farmers who have lost their markets, so that they can be reconnected with the consumers and reestablish these channels. Especially now, if we're not going to be allowed to take our food to market without the GPS location of every piece of lettuce, why don't we stand up a new local food website? And maybe it's for a suggested donation instead of for a cost. I mean, right. there are ways to get around what they're trying to do. And we need to be exploring those with extreme urgency and a lot of creativity to make sure that we can still feed ourselves.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the idea of the buy and the share. This is the idea of the CSA, the community supported agriculture. My wife and I, we grow I would say 99% of our fruits and vegetables, but we still source out animal products. So that's exactly what we do. We actually just bought another cow, a whole cow. And, we have 2 kids now, so we eat a lot more, but that's what you got to do. So for things that you can't produce yourself, I mean, I always say to people, grow as much as you can grow within your capacity, and then become the best customer of a particular farm or farms for the things that you can't get. So don't just rely on retail. Don't just rely on going to the farmer's market, especially now. You should be committing and paying up front if that's what it takes, and committing to buying large amounts, because a lot of farms too, you do farms a favor by doing that, because they only have so much storage capacity to sit on, however many 1,000 pounds of, say, beef. So by going in and saying, hey, we'll take a whole cow or a half cow or a quarter cow, whatever it is, you get a discount for doing that, but you also are doing them a favor, because, hey, you're paying them in one big shot, and you're reducing their need to sit on more product. So that's another solution for food security, is building those relationships with regional producers, because we can't all do everything. That's just not that practical. Yep. But by participating in these local economies of scale, we can help grow that system out, and thereby reducing our risk.
Yeah. One other thing we should mention here is that, there are going to be big changes to retail, food retail coming soon. And we've seen, the virus has started to lay the foundations of this over the last year. And during that time, we've seen the multinational companies, Walmart's, Kroger's, these companies that can afford to do this have created online ordering with curbside pickup. It's as if they know that something is coming. Exactly. That will, in fact, you've already seen articles. I think it was Vice ran one, but there was a number of different outlets that ran articles like, is grocery shopping again, food is dangerous, it's dirty. So they were saying grocery stores are dangerous, and you need to, should you be going to grocery stores anymore? And the answer was, of course, an unambiguous no. And so again, one of the first actions that the Biden-Harris administration did was task OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Hazard, with reevaluating their guidelines for food production, food processing, and then grocery and restaurant for retail. And so I think it is almost entirely, I just give it a matter of time now before, whether it's because of a new lockdown or whatever, OSHA will come out and say, yeah, you're right. Vice was right. It's not safe to go to the grocery stores. Yeah. You now must use curbside online ordering, curbside pickup. And that does something else, Curtis, just like we're squeezing out all the small producers, that squeezes out all of the small farmers markets, certainly, but small retailers, your local health food store and organic farm stores, all of these things will be shut down because of the virus. And that will, again, this reinforces the fact that it will now be only these certain small multinational channels through which we're able to get our food. And it will, of course, be they who are demanding that you have the GPS location of every lettuce. So this whole thing is woven together gradually. It's
amazing. Right, isn't it just been, I know you're somebody who pays attention to the propaganda, but isn't it amazing how in this last year, it has just been a consistent rollout of predictive programming. Mm-hmm. It's like you see articles, and then 2 months later, you see legislation.
Right.
It's just, and what you just laid out there had this whole idea, going to push the curbside pickup and all that. And it's amazing. I mean, I do a lot of top down. When I look at the news, I use an app called Feedly where I can scan massive amounts of headlines, and I kind of sort. I kind of sort them based on what I want to look at, technology, agriculture, whatever. And I've been quite awake to, it was actually James Corbett. I don't know if you ever talked to James Corbett or are familiar with his show, Corbett Report. Yeah. Corbett woke me up to how propaganda a long time ago got into Edward Bernays and, his, Sigmund Freud's nephew and how they do these things. And they're very old techniques. It's just that the advent of online news streams have really made the propaganda machine efficient and effective, because the way it used to work is that they would do predictive programming through news headlines and newspapers and perhaps television, but they didn't have the feedback loop that they do now, because now they have likes and shares, right? So now they put out the predictive programming. Vice Media is unbelievable, the level of propaganda. I used to love Vice when I lived in Montreal. It used to be very punk rock, and that's when Gavin McInnes was really part of it. And they sold to Al Gore's company, I believe, one of those big media conglomerates, and they've just been absolute straight up propaganda. But you can, so with all the algorithms now, they put out the predictive programming articles, they flush it out for a variety of different news organizations, and then they can basically just look at the algorithms of shares and likes and go, oh yeah, people are liking this, let's do it. And they do this in Canada almost every week, where they come out with some kind of new survey where they say something like, oh, it turns out that 75% of Canadians think that mandatory masks are a good idea. And then they came out with another one recently that said the same thing about vaccines. No, it turns out 75% of Canadians think mandatory vaccines are a good idea. And of course, you follow through and you look at the root or the source of the survey, and it's all BS. They basically will survey the most liberal area of a big city and then say that this is the opinion of the entire country. Yeah. But it's just incredible, the amount of predictive programming that's happening right now. It's just so accelerated. Do you think that with what's going on right now, and a lot of what we just talked about with what's going on in farms, is that they're going to continuously use the pandemic as the excuse to keep rolling out closures of farms, blaming everything being dirty? Do you think that the pandemic is now the main mechanism of an excuse to do that?
I think it's the theme. And so, yes. And, we've seen the bird flu, and that you've seen, there's a lot, you're exactly right. The latency, the time in between the predictive programming and then its realization in reality. Like when the coronavirus was coming out, there was some article floated, maybe we should require vaccines for flying. And it's now been 10 months later that actually goes into effect. So it's staggering how quick we're moving from the initial floating of the idea. It used to be a long social engineering and nudging, and now it's just, they're just tearing us along with them. Yeah. But so one of the predictive programming themes that we saw really pick up some steam last year was this idea of new pandemics, the zoonotic threat, new pandemics coming out of animal farming. There was swine flu, new variations of swine flu was mentioned. Actually, just yesterday, there was a new, article about, it looks like we found some new variants, some new mutations of African swine fever that we're going to have to impose additional strict biosecurity requirements. And again, this speaks to the biodiversity thing. Even Fauci himself released a paper that said, if you look back at the origins of disease and pandemics, it was actually farming and the domestication of animals that caused this whole thing to begin with, because we started encroaching on the space of animals, and now we've spread too far into nature, and that's why we need to rewild everything right now. So they've woven this tapestry of lies. And I think, yes, human health and nutrition will be the theme of a lot of these activities, but I think it'll take different forms than just this one virus. Yeah,
and the tapestry of lies is complicated too, because it's not necessarily a black and white thing. The tapestry of lies that I've seen just by watching these assholes for as long as I have and looking at these patterns is that the general mechanism is that there's a significant amount of truth to the lie, and that's how the lie works so well, is because human beings respond to truth. Truth
Mhm.
is a powerful mechanism that can cut through everything. You know, like a friend of mine, Owen Benjamin, has a great little saying about truth and how effective it was, because he had a tweet that basically immediately got him deleted off Twitter. But I did a podcast with him where he talked about how he had this one tweet that was so effective in its truth that billions of dollars in marketing campaigns wouldn't have been able to keep up with it. And that tweet was, if Caitlyn Jenner is now the woman, how can Caitlyn Jenner be the woman of the year when she hasn't been a woman for a year? It's just like so epically funny and true and cut through everything. And so the tapestry of lies, as you say it, is complicated because there's a massive element of truth in it. And so this idea you look at in Agenda 21, this whole idea of rewilding, there's no doubt that there is value in rewilding, in the sense, for any of us who are students of permaculture and the work of Bill Mollison or David Holmgren, we take elements of nature and we use nature as a model for how we look at human systems. And so there's a lot of truth to that. And the thing that's so dangerous about these New World Order folks is that they take our gut instincts, which is to connect with nature, be part of the creator, and they insatiate that desire with a little bit of a lie intertwined. Is that, okay, we're going to rewild, but it's going to be this centralized thing where we're going to have most of the farmers just be commodity-based agricultural industrial producers, and then we're going to have all you guys in cities, and we'll virtue signal about a little bit of urban farming stuff in there probably as well. But it's all about control. It's all about really, the game is to actually get people away from nature. And that's how it kind of connects with this rewilding ideas. Okay, well, nature knows best, so let's rewild nature. Because humans are so much more superior to nature, let's get us away from that. And my friend Dakota Cohen has got a book coming out where he has this great example. I think I mentioned this in my live stream yesterday, but I kind of want to run it by you, where he has these 3 images which explain regenerative, sustainable, and conventional. And so the conventional approach is the classic pyramid, where man is at the top and nature and all animals are subservient to man. And that's unsustainable, as we are both well aware, to the natural world. It's also unsustainable for our health and well-being and for our families. And then there's the sustainable model, which is the sort of the Greta Thunberg model, where humans bad, nature good. And so it's an inverted pyramid where nature is above man and man is evil. We need to reduce the population. We need to get rid of man. Man is a virus on the planet. That's the sort of modern environmentalist idiom. And then we have the regenerative model, which is a circle. And man is just one piece in that.
Yes.
And we're part of nature. And that's what I think I would love to just wake up so many people who have bought into the environmentalist narrative for so long, to bring them back to that, because that is not what you look at Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, these ideas of rewilding, the resetting the table. That is not what these people talk about. They don't talk about a system where we're in equilibrium with nature. It's us, man is bad, we need to reduce the population.
Into the smart cities with you. Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely.
And it's really key, because you mentioned this earlier in the talk too, that they're playing off of people's good intentions. They have altruistic intentions, but like you've mentioned, environmentalism is one that's been thoroughly weaponized with the climate change lie. Vegans are another one that have been weaponized into, I don't care what you eat, but some people out there really care, and they're going out and literally attacking ranchers right now and burning down butchers. I mean, it's ridiculous the extent to which that's been turned into a religious zealot war. So yeah, you're right that they take these kernels of truth, but then weaponize them to further their own agendas for control.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, the thing with vegans is, it's almost like I was a vegan for a while. I was a vegetarian for 17 years. I was a raw vegan for a year. I was a vegan for 3 years. I explored that. The thing that a lot of vegans don't realize is that to have sustainable, or let's say even better yet, regenerative agriculture. I got to stop using that word sustainable, because it's just terrible.
It's been weaponized.
Yeah, it's been weaponized. Exactly. To have a truly regenerative system, animals are an integral part of it. We both are well aware of that. There are parts of the world where you could live and be a vegan in a regenerative way. I believe that, it's possible. Just look at different cultures around the world and look at their diets, and it's possible. I think for the most part that looks like the tropics. You could probably be a vegan and eat a fairly local diet, and that could be part of an ecosystem that you live within. But for most of the world, or at least most of the Western world, lives in the Northern Hemisphere.
Mhm.
And through my study of agriculture, and I've visited hundreds of farms around the world, or at least in 5 different countries, I have never seen a regenerative system in a cold climate that didn't employ the use of animals.
It's a mandatory part of that nutrient cycle. You're absolutely right. Even if you want to eat vegan, you need animals as a healthy part of a functioning homestead. And that's why, Curtis, right? That's why manure is suddenly an industrial toxic waste. That's
Absolutely.
why
That's
there's the
the
war
end.
on animal agriculture. We're going to end animal agriculture and make
Yep.
you permanently dependent on our artificial inputs and ultimately on our artificial food.
Yep. And that's further how they commodify the farmer, is that if you commodify the inputs that the farmer uses,
Mhm.
then you've compartmentalized the farmer even more. And that has been the constant theme. I mean, I was listening to talks and reading books from the John Birch Society 20 years ago that was talking about the destruction of the family, the nuclear family, which is part and parcel to the family farm, the small farm. The family is the foundation of the small farm, and that has been the most amount of propaganda coming into the Western culture, the United States, has been about the demonization of the family. And you even look at some of the prime directives of some of these radical left-wing organizations out there, like Antifa or even BLM.
BLM, yeah, definitely.
Go on BLM's website and read their mission statement. They talk about the destruction of the family. So my question is if you actually believe that Black Lives Matter, and I do, certainly, and I believe in the Black family, how do you have a society of Black folks reaching independence and resilience without the family? If it's almost as if it's like it's one of these things where it's so paradoxical in its nature that you just go, well, obviously Black Lives Matter doesn't matter to these folks if they're saying that they want to break down the nuclear family.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's unbelievable.
It's again, those good intentions being weaponized there. Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to just show one thing. I mean, this is just what we were talking about a little bit, but I've showed this before. I like to keep showing it because it's quite amazing. This is that timeline I was talking about. So in Canada here, this alleged leaked email from somebody in the Liberal Party of Canada came out, and it kind of laid out this timeline, and basically this individual was saying, look, this is their plan and they want to do all these things in Canada. And it has been amazing to me how bang on this has been. I got this email on February 12th or 13th. I went on one of Owen Benjamin's streams on the 15th and I laid it out then. So this is not hindsight stuff. I took the email and I put it into a timeline because I'm a very visual thinker. And so what I've been doing regularly is looking at articles and then seeing how they line up. And we were talking earlier about this narrative of these mutations. And they said that explicitly, that this would be happening in February. It is amazing. This whole thing is right on target, and they're following a script. And now that we've got Biden and Harris in the US, it is just, let's go for it.
Without any material opposition at all. Yep.
No, and they're doing a really good job of demonizing the people who have been objecting to a lot of this stuff the whole way. And I think that was the kind of the bigger political play was, and maybe Trump was a part of it. Maybe he was a useful idiot. Maybe he was just a guy who tried to help the US. Who knows? But when you look at what's happened in the last 4 years in the United States with the advent of Trump and the sort of the growth of this sort of anti-establishment movement, they've really compartmentalized this massive group of people. And now the media is doubling down on this narrative of Trumpism. Let's get rid of Trumpism. And they're literally, there are pundits out there literally calling for the roundup of patriots. Like, this is the beginning of the gulag.
Yep, of the kulaks being rounded up. It's exactly, yeah.
Yep.
And there was a piece on CNN, of course, where this woman who said, oh, I had fallen, I became a QAnon supporter for a while there, but now I've seen the light and I've recovered from my addiction to this cult of these violent extremists. And, just basically bolstering this argument that anyone who thinks differently than the mainstream alternative is a violent extremist, whether you don't like GMOs or whether you have questions about a vaccine, any of these things that anyone who thinks critically about what's going on would be right to ask questions. But now suddenly they've all been lumped into a right-wing Trump supporting extremists.
Yep.
With it's a very dangerous thing that's going on there.
It is. So maybe to kind of wrap up a little bit, what's your kind of, how do you see things rolling out in the next little while? I mean, we've talked a lot about it, but going on this theme of rounding people up and all that, are you seeing this escalate to a point where there's a timeline? I mean, I look at this in Canada, I look at this LPC leaked email timeline, and according to this one, it's about the end of this year where we're going to see this great reset thing. I mean, it seems like from up here, it's been, if they can do 2 full years, because if this goes according to plan, will be 2 full years of demoralization and destabilization of the population, and creating, by bankrupting everybody's businesses, locking people down, just demoralizing them. Another year of this, we might just see where people go, yeah, I'll take whatever solution the government has for me. And if that means, taking a couple schedules of the vaccine so that I can get my universal basic income and my government cheese, sign me up. Do you see the same thing happening in the US?
Well, I'd like to be more optimistic than that. I do think the human spirit is really indomitable. I think the harder you squeeze us, the more people are going to wake up, and the more we will come to our senses and fight this. And so I have to, Curtis, remain optimistic.
Well, we're both parents. You got to stay optimistic, right?
Yeah. We've got to build the future for them. And that's why that's a large reason why I do what I do. I couldn't look my kids in the eye if I wasn't doing everything I could every single day to push back on this and to build the future I do want them to enjoy.
Yep.
And yes, unfortunately, I've seen that timeline. I know it ends with people being rounded up. I think it's rolling out the UBI and then gradually driving things. Those lockdowns are going to crash the economy even further. I absolutely think there's going to be, again, the predictive programming has been there for more false flags. They're already calling everybody violent extremists, so now they need to give some substance.
Yes.
And further justify actually rounding people up, and that will only happen when there's a really significant event that gets people to think, whoa, the government's got to do something and get these people under control, something like the Capitol, but on massive steroids. And so plenty of predictive programming around that, all of which will set the stage. And I think that timeline is even explicit in saying that at some point you will either be, this ties back to, we've seen also the talk about a debt jubilee. It's been 50 years since the first Earth Day. And so the Pope's talking about a jubilee for the earth, and we should take Sunday off to worship Gaia. And worship the creation instead of the creator.
Yeah. So
I think all of these things, roll forward. That timeline does end in saying, we will forgive your debts and you can be a part of our new beast system. If you just take these shots and there you go. So let's hope that as they squeeze harder, enough of us are waking up and growing on food that we are creating an alternative to that timeline.
Absolutely. And I think we got almost 1,200 people here. This has been my most attended live stream, Christian. So I'm happy to be sharing that with you here. I think one thing I tell people is, like Christian and I aren't here to just give you guys bad news and help you and make you feel hopeless. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to just show some things that are happening. I believe on a spiritual level, I say this every live stream. I say this, we chose to be here. We're divine. We're part of the creator. We need to create. We need to step into our role as that. And that means being part of the solution. We're here for this moment. And it's like the old saying that sometimes it's darkest before the dawn, and maybe we're there. But there's 2 things that I think are so important right now for everybody who's here listening to this is, one, always be making decisions every day, key decisions that are going to move things forward for yourself, your family, perhaps your immediate community, making decisions every day to keep things moving forward. And then 2, making sure that you are connecting with people in your community. If you're If your community is only online, that's not good enough, because we didn't even really get into the cyber pandemic on this one, but that's one I know you spoke about in the past. And that's another thing that they're wargaming out right now, is that we could potentially see the lights go out.
Oh, that's in the script. Absolutely.
That's in the script. I mean, that they've laid that out on the table. You know, guys, we've talked here about the Reset the Table, another Rockefeller document. We talked about plans, whatever that one was called, with the chapter on lockstep. You know, they have to tell us what they do. Their MO has always been to give full disclosure. Once you start researching the law, that's what it is too. There's the preamble and everything explains what it is and what they're going to do. They always do it this way. They hope that they inundate you with so many words that you don't take the time to read the terms of service, just like with your software. That's what they do. But make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people in your physical community, and you have action steps and ways to move forward with them and talk about collaborating, because we can't all be a one-man show, right? This whole concept of the lone wolf, this is not sustainable for us. This is not realistic. Human beings are very social creatures, and we need community. It's very important.
Yeah, and part of the, let me speak to that a little bit. Part of the reason that they're doing so much censorship is to create that illusion that these are fringe topics and that it's weird if you go out and talk about this. This is no longer weird to talk about. Like, everyone is upset about the masks. There are a lot of people out there who are wearing them because they're just trying to get along, but they will be receptive if they see you, setting a good example and not wearing a mask, or broaching these conversations. If you have been awake for a while and you tried to spread the word, 5-10 years ago, you definitely got some weird stares. I promise you will get an entirely different reception right now. This is no longer a weird fringe thing. These are conversations that we have to be having, and they're normal. This is actually, this is all real, right? This is actually a normal conversation for healthy people to be having right now.
Yeah.
And also, just to underscore what you said, this is not a doom and gloom conversation. I'm not about that. I do have kids. I want to imagine the best future for them and build that future for them. They would love for you to think that this is all wrapped up and they've got it.
Exactly. That's a conspiracy in itself.
Exactly. So they would love to squash out your hope, because then you give up and then they have one. That's when they win. We have a tremendous amount of power, both through numbers and then just as creative manifesting beings, to get them. And that's why they're rolling this out with everything they've got. That's why they're censoring. That's why they're going at such a breakneck speed, is because they know that we can undo this if we put our minds to it, if we put our hearts to it. And so, this is, again, not a doom and gloom conversation. It is about imagining the reality that you want to build and create for your children, and then going and doing it. But that imagination and that creative process has to be informed by a thorough understanding and study of reality, or else you're building on just nonsense, right? You're just, I would love to get $1 million tomorrow, but it's not a dream that's based in reality. I have to start where we are right now. And that's why I've taken the years of studying where we are, and we're having these conversations to spread that understanding so that we can be informed enough to find fertile ground where we want to plant these seeds of our imagination.
Absolutely. And it's like the old saying, you don't know where you're going unless you know where you've been. Mm-hmm. And so a study of history and just a realistic look at what's going on. I don't want to sit here and tell people that they need to follow all the headlines. I think guys like you and I do that because we have audiences and we want to kind of give people a perspective to maybe save them the time. They don't have to comb through and spend the time on these things like we do. But there's a lot to be said about just kind of going for it and just and getting shit done. And the way I see it is, I'm glad that I see the path. I'm glad that I'm aware of what it really looks like, what's going on, because then now I have a timeline for me. Basically, my goal is this year is to completely get myself set up as best as I can. Food, water, energy, shelter, where I'm working like mad to do all this right now. I know you are as well. And everybody can do things like this within their own context. Don't get hung up on the fact that you might not have all the resources and skills as somebody else. What's important is that you're moving forward, and you're moving forward with people that and you're making it clear to those people that you're a man or woman of action and you're doing things. And I think for me, in a real shit hits the fan scenario, that's almost the most important thing. If you have people around you, is to know that they're the kind of people that are going to do it, that they're going to make stuff happen and not just sit around till the end. Because I see a lot of people sitting idle and just going, oh yeah, no, it'll all work itself out. And I think it comes down to the fact that a lot of people don't have an understanding of history. And all it really takes is a conversation with perhaps an Eastern European who's a generation or two older than you to remind you of these things have happened before. We haven't seen this kind of thing in our lifetime. Most people here today, I'm 41 years old. I mean, I haven't seen this kind of thing in my lifetime. Neither did my dad, but my grandfather did. But even my dad, they had the Cuban Missile Crisis. They had some things, but history goes in cycles, and I think it kind of spirals, and it can spiral up and it can spiral down, and we can turn that around. We just have to move forward and make it happen.
Yeah, just get your hands dirty. Literally, start doing something. One of the core principles of a good homestead operation, a good farm operation, good soil health is maximizing biodiversity. And so be willing to experiment, do things a little bit differently than your neighbors. And if things work for you, but not for him, or vice versa, then you can be there to support each other. This is all part of that resilient, emergent food system, the decentralized one that we all need to be building right now.
Amen, brother. So this has been amazing, Christian. I'm so happy to have this conversation with you. And for everybody listening or watching, I've got Christian's primary link in the show notes here. It's iceagefarmer.com. That's probably the best place to find you, Christian?
It is, because everyone else is going to be disappearing. I already got canned from Twitter and Discord. We mentioned t.me/iceagefarmer is where I'm posting a lot of just sort of the headlines as I put the stories together on Telegram. But iceagefarmer.com is the property that I control, and we'll keep that one up as long as I possibly can.
Amazing. And folks, I delete most of my live streams off YouTube. I probably will pull this one just to prevent the censors from having anything on me. But I do have an Odyssey channel now, and everything that is on YouTube will also be up there. Not all my live streams will be there, but I will put this one up there. They're also on my membership site, fromthefield.tv. And this has been awesome, Christian. I look forward to circling back with you maybe in a little bit more time and kind of seeing where we're at. That could be really interesting.
Yeah, thanks so much. Very important conversation, and I appreciate you helping to have